You're listening to an archived Cabral Concept podcast. After listening to this show, check out the most up-to-date podcasts available at stephencabral.com/podcasts or search directly on iTunes. And now, welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
Welcome to the Cabral Concept. I'm Stephen Cabral, and it's Total Wellness Tuesday, which means I want to talk to you about your wellness, your health, and how you can improve it no matter what level you're at. So today's topic is actually about a test that very few people know about. Unless you're working with a naturopathic doctor or integrative medical doctor or functional medicine therapist or whoever might be that you're working with that does know kind of an expansive base on natural health, they may or may not know about this test, but it tests for inflammation. And it does so specifically through a very simple method called omega-3 testing. Now, if you're not familiar with this test, I highly recommend you have it done yourself or at least look into it if you're over the age of 40 or you currently have high cholesterol or high homocysteine or high CRP or any of the issues that could potentially lead to cardiovascular disease. Now let me tell you a little bit about this test and why I believe it's important for you. And it's because it looks at not just from a cardiovascular perspective, but from an overall inflammation-based perspective, which means if you're suffering from some type of skin issue right now, psoriasis, eczema, whatever it might be, an immune system imbalance like rheumatoid arthritis or an autoimmune-based disease, Hashimoto's, any imbalance in the immune system or inflammation-based, I would highly recommend looking into this because it looks at those underlying root causes. Maybe your omega-6 levels are too high as opposed to your omega-3 levels. And we're going to look at that right now. So, very aptly named omega-3 test. And I know that you can't see this that well, so what I'm going to do is kind of just zoom in quick. And what it does is it gives you an omega-3 score. So essentially, it's looking for you to have a ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s of about 5-1. Now, there's a lot of people out there who believe that your omega levels should actually be more like 2 or 3-1 from omega-6s to omega-3s. Think of it this way. Omega-6 fats aren't bad. They're bad when they're eaten in excess and if there's an imbalance to omega-3s. Because we actually do need more omega-6s than omega-3s, but they're so easy to get in our diet and they're just pervasive in our nutrition in general, so we don't need to try to get more omega-6s. The other issue is this. Unless you're trying to get omega-3s in your diet, it can be somewhat confusing and somewhat complicated to know if you are getting enough or if you're getting the right sources. Like if you're eating farm-raised fish, most people don't know there's less than 50% of the omega-3s in farm-raised fish as there is in regular wild fish. So what we're looking at is the omega-6 ratio to the omega-3s. Ideally 5-1 or, like I said, a little bit less than that ideally. So what I'm going to have you look at is the next line as well, which is arachidonic acid to EPA. Now, arachidonic acid, we can just think of it this way. You can look at it as it's the most inflammatory of the omega-6s. So most notorious because it's in red meat and other items like that, but it doesn't mean that you have to kind of victimize red meat or anything like that. It means that you have to look at your own personal levels. If you don't have an issue with it, it may not be as big a deal. If you do, it could be a larger issue to look at. And then EPA is just the bottom of that omega-3 chain reaction, which means a lot of time, if you have less total omega-3s, it's not going to make its way all the way down to EPA. Sometimes get stuck even higher up. ALA kind of starts the chain, or it might get stuck right above that at DHA, and you simply don't have enough extra output. So now, as the test goes down, and this is very, very simple to read and very, very simple to complete, I'm going to show you that next level. Is you look at the next page. Now the next page is what I think, the reason I love this test, there are so many to choose from. This, in my opinion, is the best test because of it's the least expensive and it gives you the best graphs and information. If you look here, it says USA is up at the top, then Quebec, then some of the Mediterranean continents or Mediterranean countries, and then we have some of the islands down below, which typically have the least amount of inflammatory omega-6s and most omega-3s simply because they eat the most fish, and they also have the least amount of processed food in their diet. Okay, so as I always tell all of my wellness clients when they do come in, you never want to hang around up here with your fellow Americans. That's always a bad thing when it comes to health. We spend the most money in the entire world, but we are poorer than 37th in the industrial world in terms of health, which means we simply can't buy our way out of poor health. Okay. So this person right here, they're more near the French Canadians. I think their level was around a 7. Let's see, it was a 7.7 instead of 5.1, and that's typical. I see somewhere around 7 to 10. But then their arachidonic acid to EPA level was a 16.5, and that's still supposed to be 5 to 1. So now I'm going to show you why that discrepancy comes about. Okay, so now this is the best part, in my opinion, of the entire test, and this is what I love the most about it. There's red, which typically means bad, and there's green, which typically means good. So yellow is kind of just like the cautionary zone. This person's pretty much right in the middle. And in order to get into this green zone, you need to have a 9% saturation of omega-3s in your blood. Let's just look at all the fats in your blood. If 9% are omega-3s, well, guess what? This is an amazing statistic based on scientific research that if your omega-3 levels are greater than 9%, you have a 90% risk reduction rate for sudden cardiac death. Which, I mean, if you look at it that way, if you're over 40, you should be looking at your heart health, right? If you look at this and you get your score above 9%, you've now decreased your chance for sudden cardiac death by 90%. That's an amazing statistic by doing one thing, one simple thing. Again, I recommend this to everyone, especially cardiovascular-based risk clients, but everyone in general to decrease those inflammation levels. I've done it myself, and I do it once a year. Okay, so retesting, which we'll talk about in a minute, you simply retest 3 to 4 months after you have it done initially to make sure that you've gotten those saturation levels back up. All right, so the next page gives you a lot more information. It actually breaks down EPA, DHA, total omega-3s, and the omega-3 index here. So now if you look at why this client had a lower, or I should say a worse, higher arachidonic acid, which is the inflammatory omega-6s, to EPA, it's because they do pretty well on the DHA, which again is that omega-3 right above EPA, but they never make it down to this EPA that well. That can be enzymatic conversions, that can be a total lack of omega-3s in their diet, which it looks like with this particular client. And then if we look at the arachidonic acid again down here, their level is actually, right around average. So it simply means for this particular client, who I know their nutrition plan, it's not from eating too poorly. It's actually from getting too few omega-3s in their diet. So what we did was something they can only really figure out from a test like this is we gave them a very specific and special omega-3. It's an omega-3 supplement that contains more EPA than DHA. Because you'll notice when you look at nutritional supplements, the average omega-3 naturally has more DHA than EPA. That's not a bad thing. It just means for this particular client, that could certainly work because it could make its way down to EPA. But for this particular client, again, what I was looking for was something more mood-based, more hormone-based, more anti-anxiety, more anti-inflammatory, which DHA also helps with as well, but to really saturate those levels. And so I gave them a product that has both DHA and EPA, but a higher dosage of EPA to really get those levels back up. So we're going to retest this. Just based on all the other clinical research and other people that I've worked with, we're going to see those levels get right back to basically perfection. And even if they're a little high, that's a positive thing, that's a good thing. But if we wanted to, we could simply tone down their dosage of omega-3s. Now the last page, which you may or may not ever use, they break down all the fats basically in your blood. They give you over 30 different readouts of everything like your saturated fats, palmitic acids, really going and digging deep. So if you're kind of like a research buff or someone who just loves to look into all of this information, this page right here will really kind of narrow down all of those specific things. So if you feel like your saturated fats are circulating through your body too well and they're not being removed, you'll certainly be able to see this on this particular blood test. So highly recommend it. It's called the omega-3 blood test. I'm going to link that up below in the show notes themselves. And how is this test done? Very simply. In the mail, you simply receive a little card. That's all it is. And on this card, it comes with 2 lancets. You poke the top of your middle finger, that's how I prefer to do it, and you let the blood just touch down onto the card in these little circles. That's it. That's really it. You wait for the blood drops to dry, and then you mail it into the lab. You get your results back in about 3 to 4 weeks. I actually personally read those results, and we send them out to you with a customized dosage, essentially, of omega-3s based on your levels and based on the lab's research of what you would need to raise your levels up to the proper amount. Now, from there, we might choose any one of all these different supplements that you can take. You can kind of see them. I'm going to line them up right here. I think you're able to see all of this. And we have everything from kids omega-3s. We have the capsules right here from Integrative and Ortho Omega, which are both great. This one allows for a little bit more EPA. This one's more overall great omega-3s. Both are excellent. And then we have a cod liver oil, lemon flavored. This one actually tastes pretty good, believe it or not, it does. And it contains extra D, vitamin D, and of course it has the vitamin A as well. Great one to use during the winter. Product like this, and there are many, but I have to be very cautious in what I recommend for my nutritional supplements. I need to make sure that they have third-party testing, that there's no contaminants, no heavy metals, and that the dosage in here is exactly the dosage that should be in there, and also that it's based on research. So I have a very stringent criteria, so there's not a lot that I do recommend, but these brands in particular I do. Naturals are Ortho Omega, or I should say by Ortho Omega by Ortho Molecular, Integrative Therapeutics. So great brands. And then of course we have another one for vegetarians. So we have an algae-based one. You can use flax seeds, you can use chia seeds, which I kind of recommend anyways. But as we know from the research, it doesn't convert as well to the DHA and EPA. So if you're really low and you're worried about cardiovascular disease, and you might be okay with using a fish oil potentially for a certain period of time, you can do that. And if you're a very devout vegan or vegetarian who does not eat fish, then I can understand that as well. And that's no problem. We're just going to load you up on a little bit more omega-3s and certainly watch your omega-6 intake. So it's a lab that I feel very confident with. I've done hundreds of, maybe over 1,000 now, but hundreds of omega-3 tests, and we do them double blind sometimes. We just send them in from myself or one person the same exact day, the same exact time, under different names to make sure we get the same exact results essentially that we're looking for, and they have come back. That's my criteria that I use for every lab. There are so many labs I could use. I like to use the ones that I know work. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Cabral Concept. I'm going to link up below some of my favorite omega-3 supplements. I know we usually use that for the Friday review. Maybe I'll get more into them on Friday as well. We also will link up the test where you can get the test, and then also maybe some examples and case studies soon of me actually going through all the different numbers just a little bit more in depth if you care about that. But I'm telling you, it's an easy test to do, it's an easy test to read, and it's almost even simpler to actually implement, because if you don't want to eat more fish, if you don't want to change your diet, or these particular types of things, all you do is add an omega-3 supplement once a day. Nothing could really be easier than that. Hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm Stephen Cabral, and I'll be back real soon with another episode of The Cabral Concept.
I want to sincerely thank you for your support of this podcast. I couldn't do it without you, and I mean that. I truly do. I also want to make sure you knew that we now have multiple ways for you to find your answers to the most difficult health, wellness, weight loss, and anti-aging questions. You can find podcast-specific topics like thyroid, adrenal, hormones, sleep, digestion, Ayurveda, and many more at stephencabral.com/podcasts that will then link you to your favorite Apple, Spotify, and other podcast players. Plus, all new podcasts and weekly exclusive video content is being added to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Stephen Cabral. And that's Stephen with a PH. Head on over and subscribe so that you don't miss any of the exclusive content. Lastly, if you've ever found any of my podcasts or books to be helpful, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a review on iTunes or your favorite media player for the podcast. Rating and subscribing to the YouTube and podcast allow me to reach more and more people and help spread my mission of healing throughout the world. Thank you again for being a part of this movement.